Today, now is the time for politicians to hear your voice. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to the latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined again by Robbie Barwick from the CC. Hi Robbie.
Hi Martin.
How are you doing?
Well, this is what lockdown looks like again.
You are right in the epicentre, aren't you?
Right in the epicentre, yes. In fact, we were locked down a week earlier than the rest of the state. But apart from that, I'm in the office today for the purpose of this interview, but I'm spending my time at home mostly.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly pretty chaotic. But nevertheless, in Canberra, there still is stuff going on. And actually,
Absolutely.
There's some very, very important stuff that we want to alert our viewers to, because there is an opportunity, and in fact, a very important opportunity, to have a say on a couple of really critical issues.
Yes, and this month especially is a unique opportunity, and so there's two things that we want people to participate in if they support it, and I'm assuming most people do, because it will make a difference. So the first is bail-in. Now, the submissions closed on Friday, because today is Tuesday. Yeah. So if you made a submission, thank you very much, right? And those submissions will be being read as we speak. Hopefully they influence a decision to have a hearing, and in doing so, that can set up how the Parliament debates this issue when the Banking Amendment Deposits Bill, is brought to a vote in the Senate. Now, what's crucial now, though, is for people, if you've made those who've made a submission, or even if you haven't, if you support this issue, if you don't want your deposits bailed in, if you want to remove any possible legal risk they might be bailed in, get on the phone and call your Member of Parliament, call your senators, and call the members of the committee. Phone calls, emails alternatively, they work, right? We called every Member of Parliament multiple times 2 years ago when the bill, the big bail-in law, was ran through Parliament. And even then, despite all our best efforts, they were able to orchestrate a situation where there was only 8 senators present while they pushed this through the Senate. And I was there, I was in the gallery, and one of the things that was happening in Parliament that week was Barnaby Joyce's affair had just blown up, right? And I can tell you, everyone was completely distracted by that. And the reason I'm raising that is not because the calls don't work, but we're competing with a lot, right? There's lots of distractions on parliamentarians' attention, and you really got to be a loud voice to get their attention on this. The other thing about the difference between 2 years ago and now is there's a lot of new members of Parliament. Because the Liberals thought they were going to lose the last election, a lot of them bailed out. And so you've had probably the biggest ever intake of new members of Parliament in a government that hasn't changed, because often if there's a change of government, then you'll get 20 or 30 new ones from the government side. This is a government that hasn't changed. So there's a lot of new members of Parliament. They haven't had the intense lobbying on this question of bail-in. They've never had to look at it. Now's the time to do that. Because what we're trying to influence, Martin, is the caucus discussions that will have to be had. Because this will, Senator Roberts will make sure this bill comes forward to a vote. And when he does, it will be on the agenda. The major parties will be notified it's on the agenda. And there will be a discussion in those party rooms. How do we want to vote on this bill? And we don't know how that discussion will go, but we've made a very powerful argument. We can't prove absolutely conclusively that this bill will bail in deposits. We can't prove that, but neither can they prove that it won't, right? And we've put up a bill, Senator Roberts has put up a bill which will clarify that. The government claims it has no intention to bail in deposits. Well, that's an easy thing to say. We want it reflected in the law that's your intention. It's a very simple bill. pass it. There's no downside to passing this if the government is sincere. And one or two things will happen. The government will say, the members of parliament will say to the government, well, what is the problem with passing this? All right, let's just get rid of it. You know, stop the public worrying about this question, and the government will say yes. Or alternatively, the government will say, well, actually, we better come up with a way to deflect this because we actually want to keep it ambiguous, right? In that ambiguity is a lot of flexibility for APRA. APRA has enormous powers to under the law, the powers that it has, and they might want to keep that ambiguity, and it'll force them to explain that to their own members of parliament. So the members of parliament are going to be motivated to ask those questions by the calls they get from you, right? You, the public. So those of you who've done this before, get back on the horse, pick up the phone and start making those calls. If you haven't done it before, do it for the first time, please. It works. Call your local member of parliament. That's the priority. Then find the senators in your state, right? Call them, and also call the members of the committee. So, Martin, we have a section on our website which has the contact details all listed there. You can just click on it and find those details. So we'll put it on the link below, right? Just go to that and start making those calls. We've roughly got about a month. The more calls you can make in a month, or alternatively emails, right? Calls get their attention more, but they'll still, if they get enough emails, that gets their attention as well, telling them they should support this law, right, to clear up the ambiguity, clear up the confusion. It'll have an impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just a few points to add. 142 submissions already posted on the site so far. That's as at this morning, so that's good. I'm sure there'll be more that they're still ploughing through, and so that number will rise. The second point is it's really important to underscore that the current ambiguity you could either interpret as a deliberate ambiguity, deliberately shaped to allow APRA to have unlimited powers. In fact, APRA's powers trump the Corporations Act at the moment in Australia, so they can do things without shareholder or indeed, depositor agreement or authorization. In other words, they can tell a bank to do something, right? And that is precisely the way that the Financial Stability Board, which is the international organisation driving this, deliberately has set this up. So they're trying to ensure that financial regulatory authorities can effectively go round, Parliament can go round corporations and shareholders and just intervene to support financial stability. That's the context for this, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Huge
so
power.
Yeah, and so the point is this, that if that ambiguity has been engineered, and in fact John Adams has done some great work to show how all the linkages can actually connect to provide that ambiguity, right? And in fact, John and I will be recording a show in the next couple of days on that point. If in fact parliamentarians decide to keep that ambiguity in place, then we know it's deliberate, right?
Absolutely.
Because the alternative is simply to pass a very simple piece of legislation which simply says this can't include deposits. Right, and if they do that, then the ambiguity goes away and deposit bail-in cannot happen in Australia. So it's that simple.
And we're happy to be proven wrong, but by which I mean the government passing the bill, so to clarify it. But given every other jurisdiction that we're similar to has bail-in that includes deposits, we refuse to take the government at its word that it won't bail in deposits, right? And we've laid a trap for them. You could think of in those terms. We did it more sincerely, but that's the effect it has, right? We wanted this bill amended to do what the government says it intends to do anyway. Plus, you've got the other thing that's happened more recently is Tim Wilson's opened his big mouth and proven there's confusion within the government on this question anyway, right? And that just proves our point.
And
so
this is the final thing, Robbie, to say is that a lot of the responses from parliamentarians have actually been based on the 250k deposit insurance scheme, right? Yep. So they claim, no, your deposits are safe because of the insurance scheme. People need to understand that's a separate scenario, right? That is when a bank has failed and if the government activates it, right? What we're talking about in bail-in is when essentially a financial regulator comes to a bank and says, your capital is insufficient, you need to bail in deposits to be able to ensure that the bank doesn't fail. So anybody who actually gets a response from a parliamentarian saying, oh, no, you're fine because 250k is there guaranteed, they are missing the point, either deliberately or because they don't understand the difference between the two. So it's very important to separate those two issues.
And that's a good warning, Martin, because they will get that response from members of parliament, right? Do not be placated by that response. It's irrelevant to this case. Now, what I urge people to monitor the website of the inquiry and check out those submissions. Soon you'll see submissions that Martin did. I wrote the Citizens Party submission. John Adams wrote what I call the flagship submission, really, because John went through the issue literally from go to woe and covered every possible base. And if you want to see every possible base laid out, have a look for John's submission, and you could even, once it's published, you can take that submission and email that to your members of parliament, right? Feel free to email the Citizens Party one as well. But I took a different tack, which was I wrote our submission around a response to the last time the committee looked at this, which we didn't get a chance to respond to because they made lots of statements in there that deserved a response. So ours is about that. But John's literally covers every base, right? You could send that to your member of parliament and demand they read it. The other thing I encourage people to look for, you'll see it because we'll publicise it, but there is some media interest in this subject now that the submissions are being posted, and we're anticipating some coverage perhaps from the ABC, the Financial Review, a few other places. When that coverage comes out, that's the perfect thing to contact your member of parliament about again, right? So if you make an initial call or send an initial email about this question generally, then as other developments happen, follow it up, right? Have you seen this? So that they are aware by the time they get back into Parliament in August, they're very, very aware of how big this issue is. And that will then set the scene for how it's treated in the caucus discussions. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do here, right? Everyone has to, I pledge to be a squeaky door for the next month, and it'll make an impact.
And it's worth saying, Robbie, that I had a few conversations, in fact, quite a few conversations with various media people because I'm quite well connected there. Not one of them wanted to touch this before the submission date was closed, which interestingly underscores something quite important.
Yep. Well, so people, call to arms again. Get back on the horse, whatever analogy you want to use. Let's make this work. So about a month, please start making calls straight away. So there's a second issue though, Martin, before people relax.
Use your voice again.
Use your voice again. We want to appeal to people to make another submission. There's a new inquiry in town. No. Okay. No, that's true. There is. So don't feel submissioned out. So this issue relates to the question of a national development bank that we've been pushing hard. And I'd like to encourage people, if you haven't watched it, Martin did a show the other day with a gentleman from Western Australia, Des, on an innovation there for solar-powered streetlights in rural towns. It's the kind of thing that Des pointed out that more councils would take up if there was a source of funding for it, right? And of course, that's always the issue that hides constrains councils. And those sort of innovations across that's just one type of innovation, but any kind of innovation which is, especially in the infrastructure realm, which would be a net gain, this is what a national development bank can support, right? So it's worth seeing how Des expresses that in that interview. So the opportunity that's presented itself is this: George Christensen, who is a LNP Member of Parliament from Queensland, he chairs a parliamentary joint committee, and they're doing an inquiry into diversifying trade and investment. Now, this is in the context of the coronavirus pandemic showing up our reliance on one country, or our over-reliance on one country in terms of trade, which is China. I concede it's an over-reliance on trade. I don't concede it's an over-reliance on investment, because that's well and truly exaggerated. However, without getting into the negatives of that, I don't want to pick a fight with George or the listener over that, but have a crack at me if you want. The real issue is there's a solution, right? If we want diversified trade, we should be producing more stuff here in Australia, right? And there's the Harvard Kennedy School has this index on complexity of manufacturing and trade, and Australia is well down the index, I think below Angola or Liberia, one of these countries, in 93, right? And we used to be in the 50s years ago. And countries like Switzerland are right at the top. I think Japan's number one. Switzerland is in the top 5. There's a lot more complexity in their manufacturing, what they produce. You want to diversify trade, produce more stuff, right? But how do you make it happen? Well, one way to make it happen is back the people who are innovating in Australia, and that's what a national development bank can do. And it's not about the government coming up, 100 guys sitting around in a panel and deciding what's going to be what they want manufactured in Australia. It's provide an institution that is there for the organic process of innovation that happens at the grassroots level to say, okay, I've got an idea, but this institution exists to back that idea, right? And some will fail, but some will succeed spectacularly. That's how you diversify trade. You want to diversify investment. Well, first of all, take it up with the United States, which is the biggest investor in Australia by a gazillion miles. But put that aside. We showed one of the things about the history of Australia, Martin, and you did a good interview the other day with Sam Hansen on the history of the National Bank, the Commonwealth Bank. He's done this documentary, The Battle for the Bank. We showed in our history that in the 2 world wars, when Australia did not have access to the level of foreign investment that we had before, because most of it came from Britain, and Britain had its hands full in both world wars, Australia was forced to rely on its own investment by itself. And thank God we had the Commonwealth Bank both times, which took the lead in getting the public to invest in Australia's own development, and it worked, right? And we've got $3 trillion sitting in superannuation for Australians, a huge amount of money, a sliver of it, right? A sliver of it actually gets deployed productively in this country. Just a sliver of it. A lot of it goes overseas, etc. A national development bank can be a vehicle for super funds to invest in that then, intermediates that and with the backing of the government, providing that kind of guarantee, puts that money to work for the country, right? So a national development bank ticks the boxes. It backs your development of industry, and it backs your it backs investment, right? It can provide ballast for that. So what we're encouraging people to do is make submissions to that effect to George Christensen's inquiry. This is an opportunity for actually a proper parliamentary examination of the National Development Bank issue, which has been off the agenda for decades in Australia, right? A proper parliamentary examination of it. I think the members of Parliament on the inquiry would be very open to turning this into a proper examination of that, right? They would be encouraged to by the submissions they get from the public. The more we can generate, the more effect it will have. So I really encourage people. The submissions to that close on the 31st of July. So we'll put a second link below that's to the website of the inquiry. Click on, if you support this issue, click on that and make a submission, please.
Yeah, and Robbie, it's worth underscoring, isn't it? When you actually have foreign investment coming into Australia and doing something, all the returns flow back offshore, right?
Yep.
So the net zero sum game is actually that we might have activity here and you might get a few jobs, but the flow of investment funds goes offshore again. So it actually doesn't make Australia better, larger, more effective, more economically sustainable, right? And that's the problem we've got at the moment. That's the Australian disease. And that's one of the reasons why we're just so narrowly based in terms of our investment portfolio here.
Sure. We've convinced ourselves that these neoliberal tenets of free trade and the free movement of money are the most efficient way to do things. And the results are there to see, right? We've become less sophisticated, more dependent on a handful of buyers, right? And unfortunately, we've done a lot of work on this. This is the model of an economy pioneered by the East India Company, and it just so happened that all those great liberal economists of the early 19th century, who are the fathers of neoclassical economics, they're all on the payroll of the East India Company. Their job was to come up with economic theories that justified this rapacious looting by the world's biggest ever private monopoly, right? And you guys think it's free trade, right? This is the way. No, the result, you've got to look at the real world. The results are there in the real world, and we've gone backwards under this model. So, yeah, there's some things that it's good to come from outside that's a unique contribution. But in general, when you can do a lot for yourself, you can and you should. I encourage people. There's a good Steve Keen discussion on this with an interviewer in the United Kingdom named Robbie. That's worth listening to. How Steve Keen describes the effect of foreign investment. But let's make it a positive thing. If you support the idea of a national development bank, you might have your own reasons for saying it. Express those reasons, but just understand it's the cumulative effect of a lot of submissions that addresses this issue of trade and investment diversification. From that standpoint, will get their attention. So much as, if we can generate the numbers, we get their attention, and you get their attention, then a process can begin in Parliament that you never know where it ends up. So I really encourage people to participate in this as well. It'd be a very important opportunity for us.
Yeah, and again, just to underscore, yet more hearings, yet more submissions, but this is actually how democracy works, right?
Yes.
And the interesting thing, of course, is that politicians basically go through the motions sometimes without actually really seriously wanting to take issues to where they should take. But if you get the right level of submissions and interest and everything else, it snowballs, and suddenly real Australians like you and I are actually able to influence what happens in Canberra and therefore can shape outcomes. And that is what we're in the middle of here.
There's a saying, decisions are made by those who turn up. And look, when you take the time to make these submissions, etc., you are doing the work that parliamentarians should be doing. And I only know a handful of them that do it really properly and take it seriously. But at a certain point, we can, that has an impact, right? We're seeing examples of the impact we've had. We can have an impact in a very positive area here, because frankly, we're heading towards what they call the September cliff in the economy. It's already bad. It's getting worse. It could get worse very dramatically. And that's the context in which suddenly members of Parliament can rethink everything and go, yeah, well, I was brought up to say a national bank's a bad idea, but hey, we've got no choice here. We've got to go with this approach. You can prime the pump on that by taking the time to make a submission.
And the last point I want to make is, Robbie, there will be some politicians who say, no, we can't think about this now because we're all focused on COVID, right? And my point is, we should expect our parliamentarians to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right?
Sure.
Especially when some of these issues actually have the opportunity to provide a pathway to an alternative and better future. So don't take the idea of COVID gets in the way, we can't do anything else, as the excuse for inaction.
No, absolutely don't.
Robbie, I appreciate your time today. Really important. We'll put all the links below, and we'll keep everybody on track with what's happening over the next month or so.
All right, so back on your horses. Don't stop. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Robbie. See ya.